In the story of animation, one of the more colorful chapters would have to be pertaining to Don Bluth. A former animator at Disney, Bluth left the company to start his own studio, and would go on to create some of the most adored animated films: Anastasia, An American Tail, The Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, The Secret of NIMH, all wonderful films. But before those, Bluth cut his chops writing, directing, and producing his first film, 1979's Banjo the Woodpile Cat. Inspired by his childhood pet cat that ran away from his farm, only to return several weeks later, the 30-minute short film is a visual marvel and contains traces of Bluth's signature style that would become staples in his future projects. Bluth's legacy has long been cemented, but none of that would be possible without the film that started it all. So let's look at the very first of Bluth Studios productions, Banjo the Woodpile Cat. The movie opens with a still image of Banjo looking at his shadow against an orange-red background. The title and credits appear on screen to the tune of big band music, as the lyrics for Banjo's theme, "He Couldn't Be Good," begins. The song, written by Don Bluth, as is all music in this movie, combined with the backdrop, harkens back to the golden era of Merry Melodies and Hanna-Barbera opening credits, making cartoon shorts feel like grand presentations. The lyrics are as sweet-toothed and on the nose as those classics would be too, describing our tiny hero. Banjo's the cat who could not behave. He seldom did what he should. Banjo's not really bad, they say. It's just he couldn't be good. From the first shot, the high standard of quality is apparent. The henhouse sitting beneath the tree, the chickens sprinting away from Banjo. It's the most fluid, polished, family-friendly style of animation this side of Disney. And if there's a noticeable similarity in the two studio styles, this is where Bluth's backstory becomes relevant. Before this movie, Bluth was an animator at Disney, and at the time was working on the company's next theatrical release, The Fox and the Hound. Frustrated by what he perceived to be Disney's mounting compromise of artistic integrity, both technique and financial-wise, he walked out mid-project, creating his own animation company, Bluth Studios. With part-time assistance from a total of 26 Disney animators, they would spend the next 4 years comprised of nights and weekends after work, helping to complete the project. In a downpour of loose feathers, we see our protagonist bouncing around in the distance, mimicking a cat's true-to-life, faux predatory bopping. And it won't be the last time realistic feline qualities are subtly inserted. As Banjo revs up to cause more terror, we finally get a close-up shot of his design. A white tuft of fur on his stomach, whiskers coming out of his ears, which is another unique detail you don't often see in cat characters, as well as the small tear ducts towards the center of his eyes. It's these small features that make his appearance faithful to actual animal anatomy, while still incorporating elements that make him more human, such as his fur. The long, shaggy, almost mutton chop sideburns, paired with what could be considered bangs, perfectly reflects the popular, bushy hairstyles of the 1970s. Side note, his resemblance to future Bluth film Rock-a-Doodle's main character Edmund is uncanny. Perhaps Banjo was a direct inspiration, but at the very least, may have been an extremely happy coincidence, with similar looks and farmhouse origins. Banjo continues his pursuit of the fowl as his sisters tattle to their parents. Banjo's dad chases after him as the two felines race around the farm, leaving a wake of knocked over bottles and buckets before coming to a halt. The young cat tries to justify his mischievous behavior to his father in the squeakiest voice that sounds as if it could belong to one of the little rascals. He's actually voiced by Sparky Marcus, who soon after would go on to voice his most famous acting role in 1980's Hanna-Barbera version of Richie Rich. As time goes on, Banjo's troublemaking ways continue, to the comically horrified expressions on his parents' faces, before transitioning to a scene of Banjo with his sisters climbing atop the chicken coop, revealing he brought them there to test a rumor he heard that cats always land on their feet. Realizing how high up they are, the girls understandably refuse to be a part of the experiment and begin to back away from the ledge as Banjo berates them in anger. In a last-ditch effort to prove his theory, he leaps and grabs his sisters' tails, pulling them with him as he slides down the roof. It's the most surprising moment of the film, based on how sudden and unexpected the action is. There's a natural expectation they'll grab onto a drain pipe or do something to prevent their fall, but they end up careening off the coop. It all happens so abruptly there's no time to react with any feeling other than immediate shock. The three end up hitting a tree branch on their way down, safely landing in the snow, bruised but okay. Banjo again is the subject of his father's scorn. "We landed on our feet, Dad. Well, it wasn't all my fault," he says as he lowers his head while looking up at his dad from the corners of his eyes, trying to garner sympathy. His dad isn't going for it though, and tells Banjo to retrieve a switch, which, for the uninitiated, is any kind of bendable rod used to discipline children. As he goes to fetch the instrument of discipline, he slinks away lamenting, "I always get the blame for everything. No one even cares if I was hurt. I could be limping and really seriously hurt, and no one would even care." It's borderline humorous how childish his self-pity is. He sees his punishment as his father being mean for the sake of being mean, not realizing it's an attempt to deter him from these reckless actions. But of course, the young animal can't see the forest from the trees at this stage of his life. His sulking compounds, saying rather than a switch, he should bring his father a 2x4 and let him hit him with that, all said to himself under his breath while walking through the most gorgeous backgrounds. Drawn by Jim Coleman, who was a background artist for Disney and worked on background art for The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, Coleman was tasked with drawing all 350 backgrounds for Banjo. And keep in mind, as with the other animators, this was all done in his spare time while he was employed by Disney. And for this being a side project, these backdrops are incredible. In this sequence specifically, Banjo lies on a tree root, the sprouting reeds closest to the camera being painted with less detail to give the impression of depth. The lines and shadows of the tree bark against the brushed foliage in the back with rays of sunlight peering through the shrubbery. It's easy to get lost in these shots. They're essentially miniature paintings and warrant being stared at and admired. Fueled by what he believes is righteous indignation, Banjo decides to run away from home, and his prayer is answered to the sound of an old, sputtering truck headed to Salt Lake City, as he hitches a ride on the car's axle. The action sequence is redolent of the American Tail films, interacting with objects that wouldn't garner a second look to the viewer, but are potentially lethal based on size alone to the pint-sized protagonist. Banjo rolls into town and explores all the city has to offer, which turns out to be quite perilous for a little kitten. After a near miss with traffic, he sits in a restaurant window, longing for the hot meal he sees inside as he suffers in the pouring rain. The weather quickly turns more sour, with a crash of lightning startling Banjo into running through an alleyway, desperate to find shelter, but each safe haven revealing itself to be more hazardous than the last, such as the downspout releasing water that carries him off. Even when he believes he's found reprieve from the elements, it's short-lived, as he's approached by red-eyed rats that just may be a precursor to the piercing colored eyes seen in The Secret of Nim. He runs out from the hole, falling into a puddle of water, completely frazzled from his panic and disoriented from the inner and outer stressors. As he looks around, mouth agape, panting, chest heaving, tongue sticking out, you get the notion he's so tired he has barely any control over his body's involuntary reaction to his surroundings, completely at the mercy of whatever the night will throw at him next. He ends his ordeal slinking into an empty tin can, exhausted by his unfamiliar surroundings, and the song that starts to play hits that emotional beat. You have wandered far from home. Now the good times have come and gone. Now you're wising up to see the good times, the very best times, were back home with your family. The song embodies the idea that the shortest distance between two places is a straight line, meaning there's no fluff to it. It immediately gets the message and strikes a chord right in the heart. Deliberate and effective, the combination of the song, the scenery, and all the tribulations are amplified by what makes this my favorite scene in the movie: Banjo's facial expressions. This is the closest shot of Banjo we get, and from his first inhale in an attempt to quell his tears, the artwork manages to convey a more expressive feeling than just sadness, that of sorrow. The wrinkles above his nose emulate when a person is about to cry, how their bottom lip and chin begin to quiver, and the bridge of the nose begins to rise, along with the corners of his mouth stretching beyond a contented distance. The anguish is undeniable. Light is reflected in Banjo's eyes, done in an effort to humanize him during this most tender moment. In the rest of the film, Banjo's pupils are full, black circles, but in this scene, the one that requires his face to convey his feelings the most, the change is made, and it works beautifully. That, with the smile line from his nose to his lip, the downward emphasized corners of his mouth, and my favorite part, Banjo biting his bottom lip. Done by drawing two lines between the underside of the middle of his mouth, it's incredible how this simple technique brings out this familiar facial impression. He nestles his head in his paws, his pupils rolling as tears well up in his eyes, and he pokes his head up, wiping a tear as it falls into the puddle below. And each time a tear drips, the ripple displays a new image in place of his reflection. The first of a happy Banjo hugging his mother's leg, his father's smiling face, then his two sisters. Banjo sniffles one last time before eventually breaking down, sobbing into the night. Say what you will about any of the various fundamentals of Bluth's films, but if there's one aspect his team did better than perhaps any other studio, it's heart-wrenching moments. The Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and American Tail all include classic tearjerker scenes, and this was the first instance of that eventual long-running tradition. Later that evening, Banjo is awakened by the sound of a tune being scattered by a trash-diving alley cat. Note here how reflective the beads of water and the lights in the puddle are, making a brief shot that could have been a throwaway very pleasing to look at. The cat states he's looking for food, and his gruff, raspy voice is provided by veteran voice actor Scatman Crothers, whose career spanned music, film, and television, acting in the horror classic The Shining, starring as the voice of Hong Kong Phooey, and portraying Scat Cat in Disney's The Aristocats. He coaxes Banjo out from the can, who cries that he's cold and hungry and wants to go home. The big cat introduces himself as Crazy Legs and pledges to help Banjo find the truck he rolled into town on in order to send him back home. The pair stop in on a performance of the Cat Sisters variety show, where the aforementioned group is mid-song. The sisters literally sparkle, looking as if they're wearing flowing gowns diva singers of the 60s and 70s would sport, standing out from all the other characters in the movie, making them unforgettable. Banjo starts getting homesick once again, and in an effort to keep his spirits up, Crazy Legs breaks into a song about how they have to stick together. Crothers, who is a real-life singer-musician, has a special voice, almost tailor-made for this sort of warm, inspiring music number, singing over a piano and swooning orchestral background that slowly builds. It's a highlight of the movie, with two magical visuals. One of Crazy Legs pulling shining musical notes from his hat, which dazzle like lights off a disco ball, and when one of the Cat Sisters blows cats and dinosaurs made of smoke. Inspired to return home, Banjo and Crazy Legs search for the truck, but are interrupted by snarling dogs. Banjo tries to bite one on the leg, and rather than the usual small animal surprises the big one with his unexpected attack, the dog grows even madder, rendering Banjo helpless, which is a refreshingly realistic take on what could have been the usual expected silly trope. But by going for this more genuine reaction, the dogs come off as more imposing. Post-escape, Banjo goes to sleep, as Crazy Legs looks to the sky praying, "If you could move the truck over to my direction, I know I could catch it." Though Crazy Legs is only in the movie for a short while, considering the movie's runtime, we discover a lot of his personality through the few noble actions he performs. He's a character I wish we could see more of, though I will say his influence definitely can be seen in Tiger from the American Tail series. The next morning they spot the truck, and Banjo's elation is a joy to watch, as he bounces on and around Crazy Legs, and then it becomes a race from the top of the building. Crazy Legs tells Banjo it's time to say goodbye, which Banjo is surprised by. He seems briefly shocked that this new status quo won't be following him home, and he's brought down a bit by having to leave all his new friends behind. But of course, the most touching moment is between Banjo and Crazy Legs, as he nuzzles his big jowl, but not left with enough time to communicate his full appreciation, since the truck starts driving off from town. Crazy Legs does one last good deed by getting Banjo onto the truck, waving goodbye as the young kitten rides away, finally arriving back home, hugging his family, who are overjoyed to have him back before the credits roll. The final version of Banjo the Woodpile Cat would find itself very different from what Bluth had originally intended, as the movie was originally meant to be a full-length film, complete with a villain, a subplot of Banjo's family searching for him, and several deaths. Despite the change in its script, Banjo was ultimately completed, with the film making its theatrical debut November 16, 1979. There was a failed push in making Banjo a household name. In 1983, Banjo would play on ABC and did sell successfully on VHS. Merchandising was largely cancelled, including a newspaper comic strip that was pitched but never picked up. The property lied dormant for years, with the idea for a sequel titled Banjo Meets the King of the Goblins considered, and the last time Banjo would make an appearance in something new would be in the 2009 iPhone game Banjo the Woodpile Cat adventure game, and in 2014 with the original movie's DVD release. Although Banjo never did return in any other major capacity, he does hold special significance as the first step in Bluth Studios' legacy. As Bluth says, "I think Banjo is a turned page in an ongoing assignment. I see it as a Steamboat Willie to us. It represents a moment in time when we had to flap our wings." And for all the future Bluth classics that went on to scare, delight, wonder, and rewatch numerous times, creating unforgettable viewing memories, we have Banjo the Woodpile Cat to thank.